cheers. Here's Siddle. Oh, that ball is close. He's given him. He's given him. Peter Siddle's got a hat-trick on his birthday.
Welcome back to the On the Ball podcast. Thanks for joining me today. This is episode 72 of the show. And today we'll be once again talking about the game of European football, soccer, for those in Australia or the United States. And today the transfer window ended, I think, this will be coming out on a Tuesday night. So it'll have ended yesterday or the day before, I don't know. It's ended recently, basically. It's all a bit confusing, but deadline day, it's pretty hectic. A lot of signings were made, but obviously was plenty of signings before deadline day. So today I'm going to focus on the Premier League. I'm going to go team by team and rate how I think they went in the transfer window. I'm going to factor in value. I'm going to factor in what they needed and stuff like that. And I think Thursday's episode, I'm planning on doing the exact same thing of what I'm doing here, but I'm going to discuss the other big teams throughout Europe. Barcelona's, Real Madrid's, Juventus, blah, blah, blah. But today we're going to be focusing on the Prem. So thanks for joining me today. But before we get into it, if you can like, subscribe, rate, review, all that good stuff, I'd really appreciate it. And thanks for your support. All right. This club, they've been facing a lot of negativity recently, but I actually think they're probably being harshly treated. I know off the field there's a lot of drama here, but I think on the field they're doing all right. Everyone's saying they're going to get relegated. I don't think they are, but West Ham, they're in position 20 for me. I think they had the worst window out of all the Premier League sides. I gave them a 3 out of 10. But yeah, so overall they had a profit of $600,000, which is, this is all in euros, sorry, 600,000 euros, which is always a good thing from the business point of view. If you've not spent that much money, it's really hard to have a bad window. But for me, they didn't really bring anyone in. They signed Thomas Souček on a permanent, who they had on loan last year. And they let go Grady Diangana, the young left winger, promising player, to West Brom. They did get 13.5 mil, but yeah, ultimately, probably could have got a little bit more from him if they'd given him a little bit more game time or something to show what he's got, because his start to West Brom has been quite exciting. But yeah, ultimately losing someone that exciting, that young, is a bit of a bummer for a club like West Ham, who could use a bit of young, impressive attacking talent. They also lost a few kids. Albion Ajete, they let go to Celtic. He wasn't getting any game time or anything, but they got 5 mil for him, which isn't the worst, and then they let another striker go to Norwich, but they got a bit of money for him. But yeah, ultimately they just didn't really bring anything in. In saying that, they did spend a lot last window, and it didn't really pay off, so this was probably, unfortunately, the second part of that, where they took gambles last year, spent a lot of money, so this window was probably always going to be a bit leaner, but I don't think the club's in the worst shape. I think the signings from last season are going to improve this year, and so they'll almost be new signings in themselves, blokes like Pablo Fornals. But yeah, ultimately they just didn't really bring anyone in. People are predicting them to be relegated, so for a team that's in a relegation battle, or I predict them to come 16th, but for a team that's in low on the table, you'd expect them to bring a few people in, and they've only brought in Souček and Soufal, a right back, for 6 mil. So yeah, no real changes to the starting XI of last season, because Souček was already there, and I don't think Soufal will replace Fredericks, but yeah, not great from West Ham, so they're in position 20 for me. Although I want to be pretty thorough, because I'm a very thorough guy, I can't take too long on each team, because we do have to get through 20. So 19th, I've got Southampton. I rated them a 4 out of 10. Overall, they had a loss of 15 million euros. But yeah, they didn't really... For me, the main thing was the loss of Pierre-Emile Højbjerg. He was such a crucial player to them, and I know these teams in this mid-table to low-table area, they do get picked off. Their best players do often get bought, but for me, we've seen in recent times that, those smaller clubs, although they don't have that much bargaining power, they can hardball these big clubs. We've seen it with Zaha at Palace. Like, Palace have almost seen deals of, 80 to 90 mil for Zaha. So for Højbjerg to go for 16.6 mil, I think that's pretty generous of them to let him go for that. I think they could have got up to 30 for Højbjerg. So yeah, he's the big loss. And they replaced him with a young Ibrahima Diallo from Stade Brest. I don't know too much about him, if I'm completely honest. A young 21-year-old. They spent 15 mil on him, so you would assume he's an exciting prospect, but really, if you're bringing in Diallo for Højbjerg, you would be expecting to have a lot of money left over from that transaction, but they only have 1.6 mil from that deal, because, Højbjerg went for 16.6 and they got Diallo for 15. So ultimately, I don't think that's good business from Southampton, who are usually really good at business. And then elsewhere, they got Kyle Walker-Peters. They had him on loan in the second half of last season, but they brought him in on a permanent for 13.3 mil. I think that's a solid signing for a young English 23-year-old. They can usually demand quite high prices, so I think that's solid from them. And that was to replace Cedric Soares, who went for free to Arsenal. Then they also loaned in Theo Walcott from Everton, and they bought Mohamed Salisu, who I don't think we've seen yet in the Premier League this season, from Real Valladolid, but he's a 21-year-old centre-back. So they're both solid signings. I think Walcott might start over Armstrong on that right edge, but I'm not sure. We'll find out soon, I guess. But yeah, Walker-Peters is going to start. Diallo, we're yet to see him, but he might take over Romeo in that defensive position, which would be good because Romeo, he's had his time, but at the moment he's probably not Southampton standard or the standard they want to get to. Salisu could end up being the starting centre back, but at the moment we haven't seen him. So, yep, they've bought a few starters there, but they've also sold a few starters. But for me, the main negative with Southampton is they didn't recoup much funds for what they sold. So Højbjerg only went for 16 mil. Then they sold Harrison Reed, a young Englishman, to Fulham for 6 mil, which isn't the worst. And then they sold, Cedric on a free, Boufal on a free, who could have gone for more than 10 mil. Wesley Hoedt on loan, but I don't know what's going on there. He was once a pretty promising prospect, and now he's not getting game time, and they've loaned him out 2 years in a row, I think. So yeah, I just don't think they really added much to the squad. And in a Premier League situation where a lot of teams have big money and making big signings, it's always dangerous. They're not in relegation drama or anything like that, but it's always dangerous to have a bit of a quiet window and not improve the team too much. So yeah, I've put them in the 19th, but it's probably a bit harsh. Next up, I've got Man United. I reckon people would have them a bit higher than this, the general consensus. I've similarly given them a 4 out of 10. They had a transfer loss of 77.5 mil, which is about standard for a Premier League team, to be honest. But when you look at their signings, they signed Donnie Vanderbeek, young centre mid from Ajax, for 39 mil. Then they signed Amad Traore, a winger from Atalanta, 18-year-old, for 30 mil. Alex Telles, left back from Porto, for 15 mil. And then they signed a youngster, Facundo Pellistri, for 8.5 mil, and Edison Cavani on a free. So they're not the worst signings. Look, Telles, he'll start over Luke Shaw. Yep, that's a good signing. A starting left back out of Man United for 15 mil. You'll take that most days. He's coming out of the Portuguese league. Bit of a risk in that league. There's been a lot of flops come out of there. But Donnie Vanderbeek, that's my main issue here. I don't see him starting many games in the Premier League. I think, although they're not having good results on the field, I think they're pretty set with that midfield trio of Matic, Pogba and Fernandes. For me, Vanderbeek doesn't do enough defensively to put him in the Matic role, even though I think Matic is pretty useless. And then I don't know if they will have the guts. Well, they obviously wouldn't drop Fernandes, but I don't know if they'll be dropping Pogba soon. Maybe they will, because apparently he had a bit of a shocker against Tottenham, as most of them did. But yeah, for me, Vanderbeek was just an unnecessary signing. It's in a position where they already have a lot of players, and that's kind of the main theme of their transfer window here. Traore, yep, he's a young, exciting prospect, but they already have a lot of wingers. For example, they signed Daniel James last window. Now he's like the 5th choice winger or something. And same goes for Pellistri. And then Cavani, Yes, he might score a few goals. I don't know. But I don't know what this short-term fixes obsession is with Man United and their strikers. That going back through the years, they've had Cavani, they got Gallo last year, then they had Ibra, even Falcao was there for a little bit. It's just a strange little tendency they have. I don't know why they just don't buy another good striker. So he's not really going to be starting many games, is he? He's probably just going to be there if there's injuries or something like that. And then out of the door, they finally got rid of Alexis Sanchez, but got no transfer fee for him. Chris Smalling, they got 15 mil for him, which isn't bad for a 30-year-old. And then Andreas Pereira, he got loaned out to Lazio. They're the main departures worth noting. So yeah, my issue here is that I just don't think they really improved their starting 11. I think Alex Tellers is the only one who really improves a certain position. So yeah, for me, they didn't sign a big CDM who's going to break up play, which is really their main need in my opinion, or even another centre-back. So yeah, for me, Man United, they're in 18th, 4 out of 10, not too good. Alright, 17th, I've got Burnley. Now I'm jumping into the 5 out of 10s. So Burnley, they didn't do much, to be honest. I like not being harsh on Burnley. I think they get a lot of stick for, they're just a pretty boring club, but ultimately they perform quite well for a team of their size in the Premier League. But yeah, they didn't really do much in the transfer window as usual, so I've given them a bang average 5 out of 10. They brought in Dale Stephens from Brighton, 31-year-old for a mil, so basically on a free. They brought in an interesting young prospect, Anthony Gomez Mancini, a centre attacking mid from Angers in the French league. It's a loan with an option to buy at the end of it. He's played France under 18s, and he's a highly touted prospect. So quite an interesting pickup for Burnley, who famously have a fairly dominant UK side. So that's an interesting one to get a young Frenchman in. But yeah, they let go Jeff Hendrick, who played most games, on a free to Newcastle. They let Joe Hart go to Tottenham, which doesn't really matter. They've already got Pope. They let Lennon go, who played a couple games. He went to Turkey. And then they loaned out Ben Gibson, who couldn't crack into the side, on loan to Norwich. So yeah, they just didn't really improve anything. Dale Stephens will probably play most games, but he's kind of just a replacement to Hendrick and is probably worse than Hendrick, and a bit older as well. And yeah, they didn't spend much money, which is always a positive. They only lost 1.1 million overall in the window. So yeah, just a bang average 5 out of 10 is basically the definition of it. Next up, in 16th place, I've got Manchester City. Look, I can't lie, it's a bit hard to judge some of these big teams because they do spend a lot of money, but ultimately they do get charged a high price for a lot of their players. Like we've seen with Man U, they had to pay like 8.5 mil for an 18-year-old Uruguayan who scored like 2 senior goals in his career. But yeah, Man City, I've rated them a 5 out of 10. They're 16th for me. They brought in 2 big centre-backs, Ruben Diaz and Nathan Ake, from Benfica and Bournemouth respectively, but they had to pay over 110 million for that. And with Laporte, the main centre-back at the club, they're basically, I think there's rumours Ake might have a crack at left-back, but they're likely to just be rotating on that one side of central defence. So to pay 110 mil for a rotational pair in centre-back, that's a lot of money. And they brought in Ferran Torres, who he's played a few minutes already in the Prem, but 20-year-old, 23 mil from Valencia. He's probably not going to feature too much, but yeah, I don't know. And then for me, the main concern was they only got 45 mil for Leroy Sané, 24-year-old superstar. I actually don't get what happened in this deal, to be honest. I don't really know why he didn't go for like 80 mil or even 100. But yeah, I think Bayern got an absolute steal there, as they always do. One of the best teams in the world at business. But yeah, ultimately, pretty big loss for Man City. When you think they sold Sané for 45 mil but bought Ake for 45 mil, like that's pretty outrageous to think those guys are the same value. So yeah, ultimately they upgraded their centre backs, which is a bonus. Added a little bit of attacking depth with Ferran Torres and a young exciting prospect, but they didn't get much money for Sané, and they didn't really upgrade the team too much, which I know it's hard to do when you're as good as Man City are, but yeah. So for me, I give them a 5 out of 10, and they sit in 16th position. Moving on to 15th position, this is my final 5 out of 10 side. I've got Leeds United. I reckon people might have them a little bit higher than this, but they did drop $105.2 million. Well, they had a loss of that, sorry. So they would have dropped more than that on this on their first Premier League transfer window in, I don't know, like 15 years. It's pretty good footy from them. I always respect it when the team kind of just goes all out and tries to stay in the Premier League, which I'm pretty confident they will. Most people are. A lot of their signings were just people they had on loan on permanence, like Helder Costa and the keeper Meslier, I don't know how to say it, and Jack Harrison from Man City. They loaned him back in. So all 3 of them were there last time. For me, probably the biggest negative was they failed to sign Ben White, who was probably one of their star players last year, partnering Cooper in centre back. He was a very exciting player. Well, not exciting, but he was like an exciting talent in the back line there. Brighton wouldn't let him go. So they've brought in Robin Koch and Diego Llorente for a combined 33 mil to replace him. Which is quite a sizable amount of money for a newly promoted side, but nothing major. So it'll be interesting to see if Llorente, he's only new, he came about a week ago, so it'll be interesting to see if he moves into that starting lineup or if they stay with Koch. But yeah, so probably a little bit of a downgrade in defence, and then elsewhere. They added a few attacking options. They added Rodrigo from Valencia, Rafinha from Rennes, who are both pretty good players. But then, apart from that, not much else. So it's a pretty similar team to what their starting XI is going to be pretty similar to what it was last year. Maybe a few upgrades, but nothing too major. And for me, it was just how much money they spent. They didn't really sell anyone, which I do respect, but ultimately I've got to take that into account. So they've not really improved their team too much, and they've spent a lot of money. So for me, that's a 5 out of 10, and that puts them in 15th position. Moving into the 6 out of 10s, so we're up to 14th. I've got Brighton and Hove Albion. They didn't have any big name. Well, I guess Adam Lallana is a pretty big name, isn't he? But they didn't do any huge moves. Very, very small fees from going in and out of the door down in Brighton. But yeah, I just think they profited. They had a €13.6 million profit this transfer window, which is always pretty big. It's a big gamble because, as I was saying with Southampton, you don't want to have a quiet window and all of a sudden you're in a relegation battle. But for a team like Brighton, they're not like the biggest club going around, for them to have a profit, and their team doesn't seem to have gotten too much worse, if not better. I think it's a pretty big win for them. They had Shane Duffy go on loan to Celtic, but they countered that by signing Joel Veltman from Ajax, and they brought in a youngster, Jan-Paul Van Heck, from Breda, who did go out on loan, but he could be a future replacement for Duffy. So they're not really lost much there, have they? And then Aaron Moy left. I think that's one negative. He did only go for 4.5 mil, and he's quite a decent player, but he's 29. And they brought in Adam Lallana for a free. So Lallana's probably going to do what Moy did, if not a little bit better, and they've profited from that, that transaction. They got 11.7 mil for Knockhart going to Fulham on a permanent, which is pretty solid business. And they let Dale Stevens go, and they somehow got 1.1 mil for him, so that's fairly solid. They signed a youngster from Switzerland, Andy Zakiri, for 4 mil. We haven't seen him yet, so I don't know if he's going to play, but he looked like an interesting prospect. So yeah, nothing of note really to talk about for Brighton. I just think they've done some pretty smart business there in terms of making a profit, and the team's not got worse. And with like blokes like Tarek Lamptey and other young guys like Connolly, they're going to improve, and ultimately we'll probably see the side improve with a transfer profit. So that's pretty smart business from the guys down at Brighton. They're turning into one of the smarter clubs in the Premier League. So congratulations to Brighton. They are 14th, I believe, for me. Next up, we've got West Bromwich Albion. I've got them in 13th. Another 6 out of 10 for their transfer window. They had an overall loss of €23.7 million. But I think they did some good business, brought in some good attacking talent. Their best player from last season's promotion campaign was Mateus Pereira, and they got him on a permanent from Sporting Lisbon for only 9.1 mil. So I think that's fairly solid business for a 24-year-old. And then they improved their attacking options. They brought in Grady Diangana, as I mentioned before, from West Ham, 22-year-old, for only 13.5 mil. He's already scored a goal or two, so that's looking like an exciting signing. That they're a bit of a dangerous attack, Diangana and Pereira. And then to pair them up the middle, they've got Callum Robinson, who they got from Sheffield in a swap deal for Oliver Burke. And Burke, they obviously aren't the biggest fan of him because they've been loaning him around for about 5 years. So from their point of view, it's a positive. Diangana and Robinson are both starting, and they didn't have to give up too much for them. And they re-signed their best player, or got him on a permanent. So fairly good business from West Brom. They brought in Ivanovic Branislav from Zenit for free, the 36-year-old centre-back. Can't lie, very questionable about that. I don't really get it. It'll be interesting to see if he plays or how much he plays. The main negative for West Brom was they sold Nathan Ferguson, a 19-year-old right-back who played pretty much all of last year, for free to Palace. So yeah, I don't really know how that occurs, if I'm honest. A 19-year-old who played every game of a championship season, like, you should be looking at, for in a promotion campaign, you should be looking at for at least 5 mil there, if not more. So I think they've really lost out on that one, but ultimately the rest of it was fairly good. I think their squad's come out better than it came into it. So, 6 out of 10, but yeah, nothing inspirational from them. Now into 12th, I've got Leicester. Leicester, the main thing that occurred was Ben Chilwell went to Chelsea for 50.2 mil, the young 23-year-old left back. They brought in Timothy Castagna from Atalanta for 24 mil to replace him. And what we've seen from Castagna is pretty exciting. It doesn't look like a dip in class from Chilwell to Castagna, if not an improvement. And they've profited 26 mil from that replacement. So that's pretty good footy from them. And then they brought in Wesley Fofana for 35 mil, which is quite substantial, but he's highly touted 19-year-old centre-back playing for Saint Etienne. So that's a pretty big risk, and it'll be interesting to see how much game time he gets now that they are playing a 5 or 3 at the back, however you want to see it, with 3 centre-backs. So it'll be interesting to see how much they utilise him, even though he is very young. And then their other main addition was Cengiz Under. Came on loan from Roma, the 23-year-old right winger, but not sure how much action he'll see. He might see quite a bit, who knows. They didn't really lose anyone else other than Chilwell. They let Adrian Silva go for free, and then they loaned out Rashid Ghazel, but neither of those really had an impact on the side over the last few seasons. But yeah, they didn't really improve the starting XI, so that's why I don't have them higher. But they have a few interesting pickups, and it'll be interesting to see how Fofana goes. So that's why I've given them a 6 out of 10 and have them in 12th place. Moving up to 11th, I've got Crystal Palace. Similarly, a 6 out of 10 for them. They had a profit of 2.2 mil this transfer window, which is quite good, as always. But once again, I think it's a pretty big risk, and I predict them to be relegated. So it'll be interesting to see how that risk pays off. Their main addition was Eberechi Eze. I don't know how I'm saying that. I probably should learn how to do it. He's already started a couple games for them. Young attacking midfielder from QPR, 22-year-old who bossed it last year in the Championship. 17.8 mil they paid for him, which is quite decent. Nowadays, the Championship's quite a trusted producer of talent, and they can often charge quite a high fee. So to get him for that little, I think that's very solid. They also, as I mentioned before with West Brom, they brought in Nathan Ferguson. He's already played. Oh, no, I don't think he has, sorry. But I think he might be injured. Don't quote me on that. They brought him on a free, so not really anything to lose there on a 19-year-old. And then they loaned in Michy Batshuayi, but I'm not sure how much game time he's going to get. I think they're pretty happy with their attack at the moment. And then they sold Alexander Sorloth for 20 mil, which is pretty decent, to Leipzig. 24-year-old striker who hasn't seen much game time recently. I think he's gone out on loan a couple times, but at his time at Palace, he didn't play much. So 20 mil for that's pretty decent. Yep, so that's why it's a 6 out of 10 for me. They improved their starting lineup a little bit. Nothing insane, and they had a transfer profit, so pretty decent window for them. That's why I've got them in 11th. 10th, I've got Sheffield United, the Blades. My first 7 out of 10. They had a transfer loss of 56.2 mil, and they brought in a lot of players, but no one really of note. They brought in Ryan Brewster, young striker from Liverpool. As a Liverpool fan, was sad to see him go, but ultimately I don't think he was ever going to get too much game time, as nowadays to break into that at Liverpool team you have to be a superstar. They got him for 26 mil, which is quite a lot for someone who's not proven, but he's very exciting talent, has been for quite a few years now. They brought in Aaron Ramsdale to replace the departing Dean Henderson, who went back from his short loan spell at Sheffield. Well, it was a couple of seasons, I think, but back to Man United. So they brought in Ramsdale. They did have to pay 20.5 mil, but he's 22 and he had quite a good season last year at Bournemouth. So that should be an exciting pickup for them. And then apart from that is pretty much just people who are going to add depth to the squad. Jaden Bogley and Max Lowe, fullbacks from Derby for 3.85 mil respectively. They swapped Oliver Burke with Callum Robinson. Robinson didn't really do much for them last year, and he ended up being a little bit out of favour. Didn't make the starting side. And then they added Ethan Ampadu on loan from Chelsea, who's already played, I believe. Already had a start in the Prem. So that's a solid signing there. But yeah, nothing really of note to mention. Their starting XI hasn't changed too much, but they've added depth, which is an important thing. And yeah, they didn't really lose anything either. So it'll be interesting to see how much Rhian Brewster plays and how well he goes. But yep, Sheffield, they're in 10th for me. Moving up to 9th, we've got Wolves. They had a bit of a weird window, to be honest. Lost a lot of players, gained a lot of players, but I've given them a 7 out of 10 as well. Ultimately, they had a profit loss of 2.6 million euros, which is pretty decent for a club the size of Wolves. You'd expect them to be splashing. They spent 40 mil on an 18-year-old from Porto, Fabio Silva, but I've heard he's an absolute gun. So it'll be interesting to see how he goes. They brought in Nelson Semedo, the right back from Barca, for 30 mil. They bought Kian Herver from Liverpool, young 18-year-old right back, for 9.8 mil. And then as replacements for Johnny, who went down injured last year, they brought in Marcel, 31-year-old left back from Lyon, for a couple mil, and Rayan 8 Nuri, a 19-year-old left back from Angers on loan, who's a highly talented prospect as well. And then in attacking midfielder, they brought in Vitinha from Porto, 20-year-old on loan. So quite a lot of exciting young players they've brought in there. It will be interesting to see how much game time they do have. I'm not sure if they're in the Europa League. I don't think they are, because Arsenal won the FA Cup. But always good to have some depth in the squad, you know. And yeah, I think their starting XI didn't really... sorry, I haven't talked about who left them. Diego Jota, the 23-year-old, he went to Liverpool for 44.7 mil. That's a big loss to Wolves. He was like one of their main creators, but 44.7 mil, that's quite a decent amount. Helder Costa went on a permanent to Leeds for 17.7 after being there on loan last year. They sold Matt Doherty to Spurs for 16.8 mil, and they loaned out Ruben Vinagre to Olympiacos on loan, as I mentioned. So that's quite strange, I can't lie. With Johnny going down, you'd think they would want a young left back there, but maybe they're a little bit unsure of him at the moment to be backing him in the Prem, so they loaned him out. But yeah, Doherty, Jota, big losses. Maybe Doherty, they could have got a little bit more from him in terms of a transfer fee, but he is 28. So yeah, I think they've done all right, and they've done decent to replace them. They got in Semedo and Herber on the right back to replace Doherty. They got in Marcel and Nuri to replace the injured Johnny, and they've got Silva and Vitinha to replace Jota. So it's pretty clear to see where they replace those losses. And obviously, there's blokes in their team who are improving every day, like Pedro Neto scored on the weekend, and Daniel Podence, I think his name is. They're both exciting attackers. So yeah, I don't think their starting XI got much better or anything, but yeah, I think they've got a lot more depth now, and I think to only have a transfer loss of 2.6 mil is pretty decent from Wolves. Moving up to 8th, I've got Liverpool. I can't lie, pretty biased, so it was a bit hard to judge them. But yeah, I've got them in 8th. I've given them a 7 out of 10. They brought in Diogo Jota from Wolves, as I just mentioned, for 44.7 mil. Thiago from Bayern for 22 mil. And then they brought Simicast, the left back from Olympiacos, for 13 mil as a bit of cover for Robertson. They got rid of Brewster to Sheffield for 26 mil. Lovren, they got 12 mil from him from Zenit, which is pretty good business, I'd say. And they let Lallana go on a free. The starting XI, it's probably not going to change. Thiago will be in the mix every week to play a role in that 3-man midfield, but he's not going to be a shoo-in. Probably surprising to most people, but that's just not really the way Klopp rolls. Jota, look, he's probably similarly to Thiago, he's not going to start, but I think he's a player for the future. He's 23, and he's going to get a lot of minutes, just given how many competitions Liverpool are in this year. But yeah, I don't know. It's a tough one to rate. They only had a transfer loss of 37.8 mil for a team with the wealth of Liverpool. I think that's pretty decent, and they had some good business. Thiago for 22 mil. I know he's 29 and is always injured, but 22 mil for a player of his quality is pretty good. We're getting used to good business from Liverpool, but ultimately their starting XI didn't really improve too much. But they added some good depth, some good young players, and didn't pay too much for them. So I'm going to give Liverpool a 7 out of 10 there, 8th in the Premier League for me in terms of how they went this transfer window. The final 7 out of 10, they're fittingly sitting in 7th. I've got Arsenal. I think a lot of people would have them higher, but I'm not too keen on it. They had a transfer loss of 68.35 mil. They finally got their man Thomas Partey for 50 mil, 27-year-old. 50 mil, that's quite a lot for a CDM. They brought in Gabriel, centre-back from Lille, for 26 mil. Pablo Mari, who was on loan last year, I believe. And then they made Cedric Suarez a permanent, and they got him Willian on a free. So they're quite good. Partey's going to start most weeks, if not every week. Gabriel's going to start most weeks, if not every week. Willian will start most weeks. And then Mari and Cedric are there for a bit of backup, bit of depth. And they didn't really lose too many players. They let Martinez go, the backup goalie, to Aston Villa. They got 17.4 mil for him, which is pretty good for a backup goalie. I don't know what it is with Arsenal. They seem to love a good backup goalie over the time. You know, they've had Szczesny, they had Fabianski, who have both turned out to be great goalies. Can't think of any more that have come to my head. I think they had like Manuel Almunia at one point, who was pretty decent. But for me, a bit of a concern, they let Guendouzi and Torreira both go out on loan, which I think is good for their career, because we don't know how good they're going to turn out to be, so you don't want to sell them just yet. But I think they are a little bit thin in midfield. They've basically only got 4 centre midfielders. Like, I know Maitland-Niles could play in there if they had to, but they've only got Partey, Elneny, Xhaka, and Ceballos. So, yeah, I just don't think it's that deep, and especially when they're playing Europa League this year. I think they're playing Europa League. I don't even know. I'm getting confused, but I'm pretty sure they are with their FA Cup win. So, yeah, they've improved their starting XI with Partey, Gabriel, and Willian, but I'm still not completely sold that defence is fixed. But they do have more depth in that position. But they have spent quite a bit of money, and I think they could have sold Lacazette, because now he's probably not going to play too much. We saw on the weekend he got benched for Eddie Nketiah. So the player of his value is just going to sit on the bench. I know he could play like cup games, Europa League games, but I think they could have got a bit of money for him, and they wouldn't have lost too much in their squad. So yeah, a high 7 out of 10 for me. They're sitting in 7th. In 6th, probably a surprising one, but I rate their window highly. I've got Newcastle. They're the only 8 out of 10 I've got. Transfer loss of 38.48 mil. They didn't really lose anyone. They gained Callum Wilson, Jamal Lewis, Jeff Hendrick, and Ryan Fraser, who are all arguably starters for this new-look Newcastle side. Wilson started up top in pretty much every game this year. Jamal Lewis has started at left-back pretty much every game this year. Hendrick, he's been in and out of the side, but he's already had an impact. I think he got an assist and maybe a goal so far this season. Ryan Fraser, I think he started on the weekend, but he's probably going to be in and out of the side, but will play quite a lot of games. So they didn't spend too much money. Hendrick and Fraser both frees. Wilson 22 mil, Lewis 16 mil. So I think all 4 were pretty great signings, considering they're probably all going to play more than half of the season, if not all of it. and they didn't lose too much money. So to improve 4 positions in a team of 11 and only lose 38.48 mil, I think that's a pretty good effort from Newcastle. They're not known for good business, but I think they've done quite well here. So I've got them in 6th. I don't think they're world-beating signings, but I think they're definitely subtle improvements in each of those positions. So well played to Newcastle. Tottenham, I've got them in 5th. This is my first 9 out of 10. They spent 85.1 mil. Had a transfer loss of that, sorry. They brought in Højbjerg, Reguilon, Doherty, a young Carlos Vinicius, Joe Hart, and Gareth Bale. They let Walker Peters, Vertonghen go, and then Skip, Foyth, and Sessegnon are all out on loan. They bought quite a few people who are probably going to improve their starting XI, which is always a good thing. Højbjerg, he's started every game this season. Reguilon looks like he's going to be the starter from here on out. So is Doherty. So that's 3 improvements right there. And when Gareth Bale gets right, he is probably likely going to play quite a fair amount, depending on his health. And so, yeah, I think that's pretty good footy. Carlos Vinicius as well. I was looking at him before I came on air, and he's had some pretty good form recently, and they got him in on loan as a bit of a backup striker to Harry Kane. So it'll be interesting to see how much game time he gets. But yeah, ultimately, I think it's been a pretty good window. They didn't really lose anyone key. Walker Peters, he's kind of just been a backup, and they brought in Doherty anyway. Vertonghen, we always knew he was going to leave, and they have quite a bit of depth at centre back now. Actually, I don't know if that's true. They've got Sanchez, Alderweireld, and Dyer, so maybe they could have, signed a centre back or something. But I think they've ultimately had a pretty good window, and they didn't spend too much on each player either. All fairly fair amounts, I'd say. So I've got them in 5th, the first 9 out of 10 on this episode of On the Ball podcast. The next up, I was very close to giving this team a 10 out of 10, but I think I might have been swayed by their performances recently. And I'd have to say, a lot of people were predicting this team to go down, and it is only early, but I said they were going to come 15th, so get around me, boys. I went rogue, and it looks like it might pay off. Aston Villa. I'm giving them a 9 out of 10, 4th in the Prem. They brought in Ollie Watkins, Bertrand Traore, Emiliano Martinez, Matty Cash, Ross Barkley. Pretty much 5 starters right there. Watkins is going to play almost every game up top. Martinez is going to keep every game. Barkley will play most games, you'd think, in an attacking midfield role. Cash will play pretty much every game at right back. And Traore, I'm not sure how much he's going to play, but I think he's better than Trezeguet in at right wing. So we'll see how he goes. But ultimately, didn't spend too much money on him, and he's quite a talent. So, yeah, I just think it's a really exciting window. We looked at Newcastle. They've probably got 4 people who are going to improve the starting XI in all positions, in all 4 of those positions. But this one, they're going to be doing that. But they're also exciting prospects. Most of them are young. There's just a lot of excitement about these signings for me. I was saying, joking around with Rhett, who's often on this podcast, and I was saying, tell me these signings aren't spicy, and he kind of laughed it off. But I know it's easy to say with hindsight, but we saw how they performed against Liverpool. A lot of luck involved in that win, I might add, but ultimately they had to be in scoring opportunities. And the only loss they had was they let Samatta go out on loan to Fenerbahce, who didn't really have an impact last year. So yeah, I think this could easily be a 10 out of 10 window. They did have a transfer loss of 82.35 mil. So that's 2 back-to-back years of huge spending from Villa. So they would probably be hoping to maybe jump up to mid-table in their own expectations. I don't think anyone expects that of them, but they've been spending a lot of money. But I really like the way they've spent this money this season. It's really exciting. And yes, Ross Barkley, people are saying, he's not that interesting, but you only have to put your mind back to 3 years ago when he was one of the best attacking midfielders at Everton, just feeding Romelu Lukaku. So I think he's a better pickup than a lot of people are giving credit for. He is only on loan, but this could be a deal that I could see them buying in the future. But yeah, Cash, Watkins, both very exciting. Martinez looks good, and Traore, bit of a wild card, but we'll see how he goes. Now, I've got 3 10 out of 10s. I can't lie, my number one's a bit rogue, but we'll get through the obvious ones first. In 3rd, I've got Everton. I think a lot of people would have this right up top, but I don't know. I think they spent a lot of money, and yeah, I don't like. Look, I've got them third out of 20, so I obviously rate it quite highly. But yeah, so they got Ben Godfrey in, centre back from Norwich. They did pay 27.5 mil for him, which is quite sizable, but he's likely going to replace Yerry Mina and start alongside Michael Keane. So that's an improvement right there. Bang. Alan, Doucouré, Hamish. They're pretty much going to play every game this season if fit. So, look, they spent money, but a club of Everton's size, they should probably start spending a little bit more money. They've probably been not a victim, but they've been someone in the past who's probably been a bit shy in the window. You know, they don't really throw their weight around. Last season they started doing it, and a lot of their signings didn't pay off. But already this year it's starting to pay off. They're winless so far. They're undefeated so far. James looks like one of the greatest signings in Premier League history on a free. So, yep, great business. They didn't really lose anyone too big. They lost Schneiderlin to Nice, and they let Keane and Walcott go out on loan. For me, Keane going out on loan smart. I would have liked to have seen him stay, but ultimately he's not going to get much game time, and he didn't do great last year, so I think it's good for his development. But why is he going out on loan to PSG? A, why is PSG loaning in someone? Like, when's he going to play? And B, like, why would Everton think PSG would be the club of choice for someone to develop? I don't know. It's just bizarre. And then Theo Walcott, doesn't really matter where he goes. He's not going to get much game time, is he? So, yeah, really, they've just improved 4 positions in their starting XI. Yes, they've paid a little bit for it, but not that much in terms of the Premier League nowadays. And they didn't really lose anyone. So, perfect 10 out of 10 window for me, and I've got them in third. Next 10 out of 10, I've got Chelsea. They've brought in Havertz, Werner, Chilwell, Ziyech, Mendy, Sarr, Silva. Like, that's an automatic 10 out of 10, basically. Yes, they paid a lot of money for it, and I was tempted to give them a 9 out of 10, but I was like, nah, you look at that name. Pretty much all of them could see themselves, except for maybe Sarr, could see themselves starting when fully fit. So to buy, 5 or 6 starters at a team like at the size of Chelsea, to do that, that's pretty impressive in one window. Yes, they had a transfer loss of 171.2 mil, but ultimately, if you think about it, they didn't spend any money last season. So I know it's pretty dog. I haven't taken last year's spending into account for any other side, but basically this is 2 years worth of spending they've done here. And they got Morata. They got 56 mil from Morata, which I don't know if that was agreed to prior to this window, but that's a great bit of business from them. They also got 15 mil for Pasalic, who went to Atalanta. They did let Willian and Pedro go on frees, but they were both pretty old, so they wouldn't have got much for them anyway. They were kind of pushed out of the starting lineup last year. So yeah, Chelsea's become one of the most exciting teams now. They've got a lot of good, exciting players, a lot of depth as well, young. Yeah, it's just good signs, really, at Chelsea. Very positive outlook, I'd say, with Chelsea fans right now. So yeah, for me, it's a 10 out of 10, and they're second in the Premier League. And now number 1, this is quite a shock, and I'll be honest, if you asked me where I was having this team 2 days ago, I'd probably say, 12th or something, but they've absolutely smashed deadline day. I've got Fulham, and look, I actually think they're probably still getting relegated. So to say a team who hasn't stopped relegation from happening, to say they're a 10 out of 10 and had the best window in the Premier League, you might think that's outrageous, but I honestly think they've improved so many positions in their starting XI, and I think it's just how bad their team was that got promoted, which is ultimately going to see them relegated. They signed Knockout on a permanent for 11.7 mil. He's not going to play too much, but it's not the biggest amount of money. They brought in Reed, 6.5 mil. Those two were on loan last year at Fulham, but a starting centre mid for 6.5 mil, you'll take that. And then they've got Kenny Tete and Ola Aina, who are probably going to share the right back position. Tete, 3.2 mil, Aina on loan. Aina's pretty exciting, what I've heard. I know he was a bit of a wonder kid when he was younger. They got Lamina in on loan. I don't think he's going to play much, but we know his past. He's quite talented, played at Juventus, been pretty good at Southampton. They got Adamola Lookman in, who's... Look, every time I've watched that guy play, it's been exciting. He hasn't really excelled anywhere, but from what I've seen, it's impressive. They got him on loan from Leipzig. Then they got Ruben Loftus-Cheek on loan from Chelsea, which I think that I respect that from Chelsea. We know, Chelsea have got the farm. They've got bloody 150,000 people out on loan. But for them to loan someone as good as Loftus-Cheek, I respect that because ultimately he was probably going to sit on the bench most of this year. So I respect what they've done there. Then they signed Anthony Robinson, a young left back from Wigan, for only 2.1 mil. He started on the weekend, so they must highly rate him. Then they have Tosin Adarabioyo from Man City, young centre-back, only 1 mil. And then they got Joachim Anderson, a 24-year-old centre-back from Lyon, who Lyon purchased only last year for about 30 mil. They got him on loan, and they got Alfonso Areola, the PSG backup goalie, on loan as well. So, pretty much, I know they're on loan. So, if you look at it past this season, it's not the greatest window because if they avoid relegation this year with all these loan players, they all leave. Next year, they're in a pit, basically. But they haven't lost anyone. They've improved maybe 6, 7, 8 positions in their starting XI. And I think it's smart business from them. They've only had a transfer loss of 32.85 mil. Last time they were in the Prem, they spent that much money on one player who flopped. And he's actually pretty good right now. So I think they did pretty well to keep him as well. And that's Andre, Frank, Zambo, and Gisa. So they did pretty well to keep him as well, who came back from loan to Villarreal. But yeah, I know there are a lot of loans, a lot of young players, a lot of risks. But I think I just really like what they've done here, Fulham, and I've given them number 1 place, and I've given them a 10 out of 10. So yeah, congratulations to Fulham. Big improvement. They probably would have been 20th last time when I did this 2 years ago. But yeah, congrats to them. But obviously, if you're in like the top 10 in the Premier League, you've had a pretty good window. And yeah, thanks for joining me today. As I said earlier in the episode, I'm going to be doing an episode like this on the clubs around Europe. They'll come out Thursday. But if you've enjoyed this episode, feel free to like, subscribe, rate, review, all that good stuff. Show support for the podcast. Get around us on social media. I'd really appreciate anything like that. And yep, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And I'll catch you guys next time.